Hi, I'm Brian Dunn, and welcome to the most important podcast ever. What makes it so important? It's not about me, it's about you. This podcast is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, the moments of resilience, the lessons learned, and the small acts that made a big difference. From retail floors to boardrooms and to basketball courts, we'll share the untold stories that shape lives and careers. I'm very excited today. Our guest is Coach John Tower of the University of St. Thomas men's basketball team. I have had the great privilege to watch Coach Tower lead groups of young men year after year, and they all walk out better as players and people. And it's been an absolute thrill to watch JT lead. And this podcast is all about leadership, and I'm very happy to have Coach Tower in the seat today. JT, how do you introduce yourself these days?
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Brian. So good to see you. And I've watched a bunch of your episodes and very honored that you would ask to be on. You know what? As long as somebody's respectful, I answer to just about anything. Dad is probably my favorite moniker. I got a 4-year-old daughter at home, and so Issa sort of runs the house. But it's funny when you say that. When I became the head coach back in 2011, I remember a couple buddies are like, "What are you going to have the players call you?" Because I was a young assistant. Most of them called me JT, frankly, and I had never thought about it. I'm like, well, I think they're going to probably call me the same thing they always have, which is, JT, Johnny, Coach, what, just about anything I'll answer to. But I do love the idea of leadership and the stuff that you talk about on this show regularly, and so I'm excited to hang out with you for the next half hour.
I'm thrilled to have you here. So many people know you for your huge success on the basketball court. As a player, I believe you have 2 Division III national championships under your belt. And I've seen firsthand the impact you've had. And I'm wondering how much of it is John Tower, the psychology professor, and how much of it is John Tower, the basketball legend?
Well, you're kind. I would say first it's our players, and second it's our assistant coaches, and third, honestly, it's being at a school like St. Thomas. All 3 of your boys have gone here, and they've been incredibly successful in their own right, all while being their own person. And so, I think my leadership style, we all have our style, and I some of the best advice I ever got, Steve Fritz, who I played for here at St. Thomas. I was assistant coach for 11 years. And I remember the advice he gave me. And Steve and I have very similar values, I would say, but our personalities are not identical in any way. I should say in any way, but we're different people. And so one of the beauties of working for Steve is he gave me a lot of autonomy as an assistant coach. I ran our offense. I did a lot of our recruiting, but he said, you got to be yourself first and foremost. And so I think, I've always tried to sort of blend the values, the core values that I have that I learned from my parents and so many good coaches and teachers that I was blessed to have. Along with my personality. And, kids are smart. They know if you're less than authentic. And so I think that's part of it too, letting people know who you are. And we try to, as a coach, I always try to look at it like every year is its own chapter, and let's bring in all these different personalities, and hopefully they share values and they understand. You can see on the wall behind me, unselfish, smart, skilled, tough. And so those are 4 of our core values, USST, but then let's allow people to be themselves as long as they embrace our values. And so, leadership it's very symbiotic. I think that it's not just, at least my leadership style it's not at all a dictatorship. It's much more hire really good assistant coaches, recruit really good players, and then get them to work together really selflessly.
I love the motto, up, above, behind you. I also think that you have, one of the things I find interesting, my son William was a member of the 2016 national championship team. It still gives me great pride to say that. That was a hard year for my family, and that is a wonderful memory that came from it. So I get to see a lot of your guys, and JT, your name always comes up, whether we're having an Irish whiskey by the fire or a cup of coffee in the morning. with great reverence and respect. And I wonder what you think makes your bond so strong with your players years after they've left the campus.
Well, that's kind. I want to get invited for one of those Irish whiskeys. My mother's side of her family is very Irish, and so she would love to hear that. I think part of it, and this you're going to think I'm deflecting it, but I do think first and foremost we try to recruit really, really good kids who come from families that embrace what we're about at St. Thomas. And so I hope that as a leader, I'm humble and hardworking. Those are two things that I hope every day our guys, you talked about psychology earlier, and my background is studying motivation. And whenever companies will call and say, hey, you want to speak to our company and motivate them? My short answer is absolutely not. I'm not going to motivate them. If you ever listen to one of my pregame speeches, and William certainly heard many of them, as did Joe, they're underwhelming, because if we've recruited the right players who truly love what they're doing, who are intrinsically motivated, we better not have to give a rah-rah speech every time we're playing a game. They better be excited about it. And so I do think our guys over time come to appreciate that as coaches, we're so blessed to do what we do. I mean, right now, Will with the Rockets, and I listened to your podcast with him. How cool was that? To get to see him doing what he's doing. But really, I think our players do trust that as much as they all want to play, and as much as we all want them to succeed, our job as coaches is to help them grow and develop. And I think they trust that whether they're getting what they want every day in practice or in the games, that we truly want what's best for them, and we want to help them in their life's journey. And that's part of winning games is really, really fun. But that evaporates, as you know, the next morning you wake up, and probably not even the next morning. By later that night, you're looking at the next game. But it's seeing the young men develop. And I've been fortunate to be here 26 years coaching, but I also grew up watching St. Thomas basketball. And so the legacy within this program of so many special people, and for me to get to play a part in it and then see the connections between those guys. I mean, Will's group is not an anomaly. The friendships that those guys forge, and then to see them, across different eras, when you see guys that are 10 years older than Will and 8 years younger than Will, and they all stay connected. It's a big part of why I continue to coach at St. Thomas. I love the school and the mission, but to get to work with these kind of young people every day is, I consider myself really fortunate. So thank you for the compliment, but it's a two-way street.
We ran into some Tommies when William and I and Joseph went to Scotland and Ireland, a little golf trip this summer, and we were having a cocktail, and there were a couple of Tommies sitting right across and wanted to send a picture to JT. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's really cool.
Those are moments, you're right, when alums will send pictures. In fact, a guy who graduated in 2000, Joe Burry, who I didn't coach actually, but he worked our camps forever, and we played 3-on-3 tourneys together. He was in a store getting food the other night, and he texted me a picture of 3 of our current players. And so that to me is so awesome, because his first thing about them was, gosh, were those great guys. Like they talked, he actually said, I don't think I would have asked questions the way they did. And so to see those connections, and I mean, Joe's dad, John, he's the guy that got me into the field of psychology at St. Thomas. He's in his 51st year teaching here at UST. And so again, when you look at the interconnectedness of life, there's lots of different paths that people can follow. And I think I've been really blessed to have one that there's a lot of those connections just between really good people who want to compete, they want to win, but there's a really healthy perspective above and beyond that.
And it shows, JT, it really does. And it, to my mind, it brings the word culture, and every leader talks about culture, right? And it can become such BS bingo. But I'm wondering how you think about culture as a coach. And I'm going to frame it this way. You talked about the new players coming in each year. I used to talk to my store teams. Every time you get a new player on the team, it's a whole new team, right? Because the dynamic shifts and changes. And I'm just wondering, there's so many similarities year to year. When I meet your guys from years ago that I didn't know, it's like, it could be like I'm talking to Taylor. Well, maybe not quite Taylor, but you know what I'm saying. And I'm just wondering how you think about that year after year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And ironically, when I came back to St. Thomas, it was as a full-time psychology professor. So my first 11 years, that was my full-time job. and I was a volunteer assistant starting out with the basketball team. And the first course I ever taught was cross-cultural psychology. And it turned out to be this unbelievable experience for me, hopefully the students as well. But every single semester I taught that course, I would teach it every fall, and we would spend the first week debating how you define culture. And we were never going to agree. And I would put up 30 different definitions from the leading cross-cultural psychologists in the world. I was not one of them. And then the students would come up with theirs, and we'd debate and we'd argue. And I think one of the beautiful things about culture, but also the challenging things, is it literally is everywhere. We all know it. We know how important it is, yet it is really tough to measure, right? If you say, hey, measure their culture, well, what are we doing? What are we rating? Who are we asking? And so, but for me, and I talk about this with the team quite a bit, culture does embody just about everything they do, their norms, their attitudes, their values, their beliefs, their behavior. And culture absolutely is passed along through generations. It can change. It usually doesn't change 180 degrees, but it does change over time and with different people. But there's a consistency. And so part of why I share that with our team is I want them to understand that, hey, the generations of players who have come before them bought into those values. They embrace them. It's been successful. We don't expect you guys to be those guys. We don't expect you to be the next Taylor Montero or Will Dunn or anybody else. But we do expect these values, above me in the background. And if we play like that every day, and we probably got 5 other mantras that we try to live by, to me, then that's the stuff that permeates our behavior day to day. But if you walked around our program, I think the strongest cultures are the ones where, well, it's more implicit than explicit. We don't have a handbook with 50 rules. It's much more, here's the values that we're going to live by. And frankly, I think in the recruiting process, we do try to weed some people out that if these aren't the things that you're going to love, you probably won't be happy at St. Thomas. Division III, we went 10 years in a row without anybody averaging 15 points a game. And you know how good those players were. And those guys could have scored 20, 25 points a game, but they wanted to be a part of this. And so now we would lose some kids every year who'd hear that. And I wasn't telling them they couldn't. I just said, listen, the odds are you're not going to score 25 points a game here. And a lot of times they'd go to other schools. I remember watching Will. The first time we saw Will, he was not the first time I'd seen him in high school a lot, but he was thinking about leaving Fort Wayne, or he decided to leave Fort Wayne. We had met, and he was playing with our guys in a summer league at Kennedy. And I remember I was there with 2 friends, and right away, like literally the first possession, they're like, he plays like a Tommy. And you're going to love this because it was the way he pivoted, the way he jump stopped, the way he got in a stance on defense, all that stuff. And it was like right away, my buddies who weren't coaching with me, they just wanted to watch the guys. And that was the only time in the summer we could watch kids, or we couldn't work with them at all in Division III. But like literally their first possession, they're like, he plays like a Tommy. And so that to me is really important in terms of the continuity of our program.
That phrase fills me with pride. He played like a Tommy. That's high praise coming from your buddies. What was the toughest thing, JT, about making the move from D3 to D1? I was super angry about what I thought was pitchfork and torches coming for our school. And then I always wondered, I don't know, JT is he's a pretty wily guy, and he's certainly going to know how to make this work for us. What was the hardest thing for you personally and for the squad?
Yeah, I do think that it was, we had been in the MISC for 100 plus years. It was a league that was wonderful and still is for our school. So when we made the jump, the word unprecedented, like culture, gets used a lot, but I think in this case it's appropriate. And there were no, I like to joke, there were no D3 to D1 for dummies books out there because no school had done it. And so I talked to just about every D2 coach in the country whose team had jumped up to Division I, schools like Bellarmine down in Louisville, Cal Baptist, and a handful of others. And those guys were great. But inevitably, as we were talking, it would kind of come clear to me that they thought we were jumping from D2 to D1. And then they'd say, so how many scholarship guys you got coming back? And I was like, well, 0. We're jumping from D3. And then the phone would go kind of quiet, because it was one of those daunting things. And those 9 guys that first year will always have a spot in my heart. When people ask about the last 3 years and we've won 19, 20, and 24 games, I tell everybody the best pressure test ever, and I'm going back to your last question a little bit, but the best pressure test ever of our culture, I believe, was that first year in Division I. You don't know if you have a great culture when you're winning. You can assume it, but you don't know it. Those guys had lost 8 games in 3 years of Division III basketball. The Riley Millers, Anders Nelson, Bert Hedstrom, Kevin Cunningham, Ryan Lindbergh, Zach Tyson, Parker, Brooks, and Will Ingles. I hope I got all 9 of them. Those 9 guys had lost 8 games. And all of a sudden, we're playing Division I basketball, and those guys didn't sign up for that. In fact, some of those guys played Division III JV basketball early in their careers. And there's some of my favorite stories ever. I think 3 or 4 of those guys scored more points in Division I than they scored in Division III, which is incredible. A guard like Kevin Cunningham, who he literally scored more points per game in Division I as a senior. And I remember recruiting him in Division III and some other D3 schools like, really, you're going to, and I know Joe's good friends with Kevin. He was like, really, you're going to recruit that guy for St. Thomas? And we ended up playing him Division I basketball, and we lost 12 straight games that year. So as I'm telling this great story, it's like a Disney movie. Hold on a second here. Yeah, we won 10 games, but we also lost 12 straight games, and we were not getting annihilated most of those. We were tied with 8 minutes left, and we get worn down. They might have a guy who's going to play in the NBA someday, and he'd hit some big shots. But so that to me was the best pressure test of our culture we've ever had. And those guys, none of us were happy. It was not easy. You can ask my wife, Chancey, losing is hard. I don't care if you're the underdog or not, it's hard. But to go in that locker room game after game and know those guys weren't going to point fingers at one another or at the staff, and we were not to them. We were all frustrated, and we won the last 2 of the last 3 games of that year to get to 10 wins. And I really felt like it sent those guys off in an appropriate way that they had earned. But it also set the stage for what we're doing now. And you can probably hear in my voice, like those guys, when people ask me about those 9 guys, they embodied those values, but they were also fearless. I mean, they took Bert Hedstrom and Ryan Lindbergh, came back as grad students, turned down good jobs to pay tuition, to play a 5th year where Bert and Ryan are 6'2" forwards in Division I, and they're both starting. And so that season, I think, could actually be a movie because it truly represents all that's good about sports.
I watched a lot of those games online, and that team never quit once. And they were overmatched. And when you get deeper into the rotation, you get to the 7th, 8th, and 9th guy, that's where they still have a lot of athletes, these teams. And I thought the Tommies just fought so hard. I thought that was a great job. I really did. And a great team.
And those guys, we led the country in fewest turnovers that year. In fact, we almost broke the all-time Division I record for fewest turnovers. And that was simply because those guys knew if we turn the ball over, we're going to get destroyed. And so we were the worst defensive team in the country. We were the worst rebounding team. And that wasn't because we weren't trying. It was just we were overmatched athletically at every spot. But those guys, it was really, when I look back on it, and it's not that long ago. It's less than 4 years ago. But I look at those guys and what they did for our program and university, and the friendships that they made, the memories they'll have. To me, it's a group that will always be so incredibly vital to wherever we go down the road.
As you moved into D1, JT, did expectations change for you as the head coach? Was it difficult? I believe, and check me if I've got this wrong, I believe at that point you had to move away from the lectern in teaching your psychology because of the demands of the D1 schedule. Did expectations change for you?
Well, I think, and so I did. I taught for 21 years at St. Thomas, and moving away from teaching, it's something that I loved. It's different than coaching, and I always have felt like as coaches, we can learn a lot from teachers, sort of how we instruct and lead. And I think teachers can learn from coaches how we try to build a team and truly a group that's working together, which is sometimes harder in a classroom where there's not a scoreboard. But I think the other thing that's unique is that, like, the day we left Division III officially, July 1st, 2021, was also the day that NIL became legal. And NIL wasn't then what it is now. But if a coach at a high major school last summer was like, he'd taken a new job the same summer, and he's like, nobody knew what we were signing up for because they jumped conferences. I won't name the coach of the conference. And he's like, has anybody else had to deal with this kind of transition? I looked at him like, well, you do know we jumped from D3 to D1. And he's like, okay, maybe you guys, maybe, but that's it. Because his school ended up being in a much more difficult conference than the one he had probably signed up for initially. Sure. I think the job has changed a lot. I mean, literally, I've got the same 5-minute commute from home. I got the same office, although as I joked with you beforehand, we're moving offices in 7 days. And so my job title is the same, and yet literally everything else has changed. From the fundraising to the number of assistant coaches we have on staff. In Division III, we didn't have a full-time assistant. You remember Mike Keating, my right-hand man, and the job he did. He was never full-time at St. Thomas. Jay Pivick, who is one of your esteemed guests on this show, and certainly let me know that he was invited long before I was, and will hold that over me like he does so many other things.
I was practicing, JT, getting ready for you.
But I look at what we did in Division III, and it was so many people working tirelessly. And now the staff, I mean, our athletic staff, I think, has grown from 30 to probably 115, 120 across the entire department. So a lot has changed, but at the core, basketball hasn't. I mean, if you came to our games, Tim Jarmus, who played for the Badgers, he coached with us for 5 years.
Yep.
And was unbelievable. In fact, he and I just went biking around the lakes on Sunday, and we were laughing about all sorts of Tommy basketball stories. But I remember him asking me, so when we go D1, are you going to change how you run practice? And I sort of looked at him, I'm like, Tim, for good or bad, this is all I got. Like if I had secret drills that are really, really good, I wouldn't have held them out until maybe we get kicked out of the conference and the NCAA waves a magic wand and we jump from D3 to D1. And so I don't think the coaching part has changed as much, but everything else around it certainly has. And I'm really fortunate to have great assistants who can do a lot of the coaching.
I just want to give Keats a shout out. He was a defensive genius. I always thought he was just such a great defensive guy, a great man, and a great defensive mind.
And he was a great player. I mean, he was when you look at when we really got rolling in Division III, it was a team with him, Brian Schnettler, who's now at Wayzata, winning a school in the state, Isaac Rosefeld, who was an All-American who played overseas for a decade, and then Sean Sweeney, who's the top assistant with the San Antonio Spurs. Those four guys, and back in 05, 06, that started our run of 12 straight conference titles. And Keats, I literally consider him like a brother. People, when we went D1, they're like, did you guys have a falling out? What? No, he just decided he didn't want to do it. He might be the most principled person I've ever met in my life. Like literally, when I would explain to people who would give anything for a Division I assistant job, that he was my top assistant in Division III. We had a ton of success. The players loved him. And he just said, I can't do it. And he and his wife have two wonderful young kids, and he raises them. And so, no, Keats is, again, you talk about guys who have been one of the pillars of this program. Mike Keating, as a player and as assistant coach, and he was with me for 11 years, was as good as they come.
Awesome. So moving into D1, recruiting, you spend more time recruiting than you used to have to. I mean, what I want trying to transition to here, JT, is how do you balance? Because I know what a family man you are, and I got nothing but respect for that, because there's nothing more important. How do you balance that? Because D1's got to be a bigger drain. Am I right about that?
Well, it's interesting. D1, there's so much more travel. Like when I look in Division III, I bet we were on, hopefully we made the national tournament. But if we didn't make before that, I would probably sleep in a hotel 3 nights a year. I would say it would be our trip out west, and hopefully then we'd miss some for the national tournament. Most of our recruiting was regional. Now I bet 50 or 60 nights a year I'm away from home between our games and recruiting. The difference with recruiting Division I, there are a lot of guardrails, so it's a little more predictable. Like in Division III, I would be out at high school games Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, pretty much every week. And in Division I, there's actually a limit on how much your staff can be out during the school year, how many times you can see guys. And so the travel is certainly a lot more, but the recruiting is a little different, where we probably don't cast as wide a net. In Division III, we had a junior varsity, and so we were looking to constantly in our culture have 30 players that some of them were, guys who were ready to contribute right away, and some were guys that were going to work their way up through the JV. And so I think the biggest change in Division I recruiting wise has been the amount of travel and actually the limited observations that you get. Anders Nelson, who you would know from Edina, I mean, we were practically stalking him. I think we went to 21 straight high school games. Well, in Division I, you can only watch a kid 7 times during the school year. And so we could never, ever have done that. And Will DeBerg was critical in his recruitment. Will went to Edina and so on. I look at what you could do in Division III. You actually, really the only rules is you can't give financial aid based on, based on athletics, and you can't work with your team between March and October. But Division I, there's a lot more compliance that we have to go through. And so anyways, I'm jumping around a little, but the differences are stark when it comes to recruiting. I'd say scheduling, games, and then travel.
It is, and this year is your first year we're eligible for postseason. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're eligible. The NCAA changed or modified a rule. So initially it was 4 years. We got 5 because we were jumping from D3. People didn't love the rule. And, like I always say, though, we signed up for it. We knew up front that we can't go to the tournament. And that I do think it was challenging recruiting, right? When you're recruiting a kid and everybody grows up saying, I want to play in March Madness, which is understandable. We were having to be upfront with kids like, well, you're not going to be in March Madness if you come play for us. And it's not because we may or may not be good enough, right? Probably most people didn't think we would be as good as we've gotten, at least many. But kids had to sort of give up that dream of March Madness. And so for them to take a year off that and we're eligible this year, I think it's really exciting. And it's also open, when you think about objections and sales, well, if you're playing college basketball and you can't go to March Madness, even though it shouldn't be, right? And I spun it. I should have called you for tips. I tried to spin it every which way. One of them was you're going to be in college for, I think it's 1,460 days. If you're just going to a school for the chance to be in March Madness one time, is that really? But I understand it because I was a kid growing up that way. And so, yeah, we're very excited about that possibility.
I think it's very exciting, and I think it's going to make things very interesting over the years ahead. When you think about, I just want to go back to you being such a family man for a second. Are there things you've learned as a father that have helped you as a coach, and vice versa?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. So our boys, Jack is 23. And he's actually a grad student who joined the team as a walk-on this year. So that's going to totally unpredicted even a month ago. And he came to me in August and he's like, what if I took grad classes and joined the team? So he's on the team. Adam's a walk-on. So those two are, I get to see him every day. Raekwon, our Q, is a senior at Cretin-Derham Hall. And he's doing great playing 3 sports there. And then Issa's a 4-year-old. And so I think each of them has taught me different things. They all think Issa's spoiled. And she's got these 3 guys who they love her, but they also tease her. She is going to be one tough cookie. But just yesterday, I pulled up this file. It was from 2003. And my old advisor at Wisconsin, Judy Harakevich, and I had been working to publish this paper. And the title of the file was January 2003. So Jack was 6 months old. And part of the file name was Jack Stopped Crying. And so I brought him over. I said, hey, Jack, I know you think Issa whines all the time. This was clearly in response to you incessantly crying. And I finally got a 2-hour window to work on this manuscript. And so I titled it after you. And I think, Chancey, my wife, who founded a charter school, Prodeo Academy. And so she loves kids more than anybody I've ever met. I've learned a lot from her in terms of patience because, as you know, parenting, it's the best journey. But coaching and parenting, the 2 professions that I know where if you go to bed at night thinking I got this figured out, by morning there is going to be a calamity, right? One of the kids. And so I think that's one of the things that parenting has taught me is probably a different level of empathy for our players. Just it's very easy for me to sit and even if I'm delivering a tough message to a kid, it might be about playing time, his role in the team. It's very easy for me to think if this were Jack or Adam or RQ or Issa, is this how I'd want the message being delivered? And then the other thing is I think our players, Issa she baked little muffins for the team the other day with her babysitter and brought them to practice. So I think for the players to get to see that, I mean, Jack and Adam grew up in that gym, right? They literally from the time they could walk, they would be at practices hanging out in the corner. And now to see them out on the court, it just, again, it's one of those, I'm very blessed because it's like a full circle moment, seeing how family and basketball can bring people together. That's
so cool. And I should just emphasize, Chancey, JT's wife, is very accomplished in what she's done with her charter school. And she's on my list. I'm targeting her because I think it's a fascinating story.
She'd be a better guest than I am, Brian. And I'll tell you the thing about her, and I think you know this, she She battled non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2018. She battled breast cancer in 2020. And I mean, her life, she has more energy than anybody I've ever met. I mean, she truly, when I met her, I called a friend and I said, if I ever go on a date with her, I'm going to end up married to her. And I knew that because she just had this zeal for life, and literally all she wants to do is help kids everywhere she is. So yeah, Prodeo Academy, you get a chance to talk to her. You walk away feeling inspired. I do every day. I watch the work she does and I'm like, man, what I do pales in comparison.
For sure. And I put in a good word for me because I'm going to be hitting her up. I've got just a couple quick questions here for you, JT. You've been so generous with your time. Looking ahead, how do you think about your legacy as the head coach at UST, or do you think about such things?
I don't, but it does make me feel old when you say that. And I know I also take it as a huge compliment. I've never thought about it that way because you're always, I remember my first year here volunteer coaching, and you're like, all right, who knows where life's going to take me? I got this job teaching and coaching. I do think in this era, it's rare for coaches to be at a spot for very long. And there's a number of reasons that go into that, as you know. So I consider myself very fortunate. And just for you to ask that question does give me pause, because you start thinking about all the guys you worked with. I think about all the guys I played with. I mean, probably 6 of my 12 closest friends in life are my teammates from St. Thomas. And so to be a part of this story, and now for us jumping to Division I, it just, it's one of those things that mid-career I would have never expected. People always ask me, do you want to coach Division I? And honestly, my answer was always, that is irrelevant. I wouldn't turn it down, but I'm not going to leave St. Thomas for something just because of a label. And so, I guess I'm honored you even asked the question. I don't have a good answer to it.
Well, for all the years I was around, that was on everybody's JT bingo card, because we knew D1 was going to come knocking for you. Okay, 2 more quick. If you could go back and talk to young JT as an unpaid intern or assistant, is there a piece of advice you'd give young JT?
Oh man, I'd probably tell him, well, when you're young, it's easy to worry about the future. And I'd probably tell him just like, hey, kid, you're doing pretty well. Keep working hard and trust. It sounds cliche to say trust the process, but it just, and coaching is a great example. You talk to a lot of the head coaches in the NBA, and the roads that got them there are so winding and circuitous. And so I think it's wonderful to hear those stories. I ended up not bouncing around a lot, but I stayed here for 11 years as an assistant, teaching and coaching. And I think, so that would probably be it, is just honestly for young people to trust. And I think that's harder in today's age than ever before, because they have so much at their fingertips all the time. We deal with it with the transfer portal, right? Where it's just delayed gratification. The idea that if you're in a spot that's good for you and your development, the grass is not always greener, right? Jay Wright stayed at Villanova for so long, and I've always adhered to it. He said, don't mess with happy was the quote that he used. And he got it from Jimmy Valvano. And Jimmy Valvano told him that. He said, I never should have left Iona. And Jay Wright's like, what do you mean? You won a title at NC State? And Jimmy V's like, yeah, but I was never happier than I was at Iona. And so I think I would have told young JT, like, hey, you're in a really good spot, surrounded by great people. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah, I think enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey, because so easy when you're young to be looking for the next thing, and you're actually building the next thing and you're not even aware. Okay, last one, JT, and you've been so generous with your time. Every player has a Coach Tower, JT story. What's one moment with one of your players that still makes you smile or laugh when you think about it?
Oh, there's so many. I'll tell you and I just had a 90-minute conversation with a player the other day, and it was so wide ranging. Like literally it started with him asking me about a book I had written on youth sports and parents, WASP, WSP, well-intentioned over-involved sports parents. We talked about his role here. Then there was a WASP in my office, and we ended up talking about, should we kill it? And he's like, well, I wouldn't. So then I felt some cognitive dissonance. So then I put a cup over it. And then he said, do you think you're depriving it of oxygen? So I said, okay, let's let it out the door. And he said, well, but then it might sting the kids in the study hall. I'm like, so wait, so you're more comfortable with the wasp stinging me or you? And so at the end of it, he left this 90-minute meeting, and I'll never forget it, 26 years in. he literally left with his laptop with a cup like this over a wasp, and he walked outside and set it free. And so that may not be the most memorable one, but honestly, like, I didn't have 90 minutes that day to set aside to meet with him. And I don't think I'll ever forget that talk. And so that, to me, is what's special about coaching. Is I could probably bore you to tears telling you about almost every player I've ever coached, where you have one of those moments. And to me, it's the beauty of coaching. It's like, it wasn't just me hopefully getting him to understand his role with us. It was him showing me a part of him that he didn't want to kill the wasp, and he wanted to set it free, but he didn't want it to hurt other students. I mean, just like all of that stuff wound together, it helped me learn a lot more about him.
He was systems thinking. He was walking through the whole thing.
It was incredible. And so now I just got to get that same level of thoughtfulness from all our players on the court, and not just when we're trying to save wasps' lives, which, by the way, I did let them know at this time of the year in Minnesota, that wasp does not have many more days as it is. So
that's right. That's right. When you just said trust the process, it triggered something with me about my son, William. Whether we're on the golf course or we're talking about next steps in his career, he says those exact words. You have to trust the process. And he'll come up to me when I've hit a bad shot, and he'll say, "You're not trusting the process." And I said, "You have no idea how little help that is right now."
Well, and so, yeah, we probably, just like culture, this has been so fun because there are so many of those sayings that they hold true, but they have to have that meaning, right? And what is it that resonates with a young player? Because as a coach, as a dad, you do know, hey, put your head down and work really hard and surround yourself with good people. Probably there's going to be good results. But it's so easy for our players, guys in the NBA, to look around and see somebody who's making more money, and it's like, well, hold on a second. They're the anomaly. Let's look at what's the best path for you. And so I'm sure you love it when your son, my son's given me a lot of advice. I'm sure that's exactly what we need from Will after you've sliced one. Like, thanks a lot, Will.
Yeah, but you know what? Now I fully appreciate where it comes from, because I've always thought, what a great way to think about things. We have to trust the process. JT, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. The time has flown by. I could talk to you for 4 hours about all this stuff. I also want you to know, I think you're a real important leader in this community. I think the way you impact these players that come through your program, and it lasts, I think, for the rest of their lives, at least as I've seen so far, I think is an extraordinary contribution. And I think you're just a treasure for our community. And I hope you'll come back after the season and we can pick this back up.
Hey, thank you. That means a lot coming from you, Brian. I appreciate your friendship and, you trusting us with your sons at St. Thomas. So many great memories. And I could talk to you for hours. The feeling is mutual. Leadership, how you build teams, all that you've done. So this was special. And I will say, watching you with your son, Will, that podcast is I've never seen a father-son podcast where like that. And so it really, the reason I got into basketball, in part, my dad ran mutual funds for Piper Jaffray, but he coached an 8th grade basketball team. He just loved it. He taught for 1 year. He knew this is not for me, but he kept coaching this team for 25 years at Nativity Grade School. And so I say to people all the time, like, that was the reason I fell in love with basketball. I got to hang out with my dad in a gym with the coolest people in the world, who at the time were 14-year-olds. And so seeing you and Will on that podcast, that was one of the cooler moments I've seen.
Well, thank you so much, JT, and put in a good word with Chancey for me, will you?
I will do that.
All right. Well, that's it for the most important podcast ever for this episode. Pardon the stumble there. Big thanks to Coach John Tower from the University of St. Thomas for sharing his story, and an even bigger thanks to you for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, and how could you not, please share it with someone who might find it meaningful. You can watch and listen on our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. And I want to just close by saying, roll Toms.
Roll Toms.